Good afternoon. The noonday gun has just gone off here in our Cape Town studio where we are based, which signals the start of our weekly webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants and distinguished guests, welcome to this exceptional weekly webinar hosted by Real Estate Investor, hosted on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 12 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. And today's webinar is brought to you by Real Estate Investor. This webinar particularly is hosted in conjunction with our event partners. Smart Procurement hosted the inaugural Residential Investment and Development Conference and Awards 2023. And that will take place at the Sandton Convention Center on Wednesday, the 12th and Thursday, the 13th of July. We will be giving more information on the conference a bit later, including a special offer on tickets for the live event at the end of the webinar. My name is Neil Peterson. I'm the founder and content-in-chief of Real Estate Investor, South Africa's leading real estate platform, and our passion lies in serving the South African property and global real estate business community through our extensive digital platforms. From our website, rei.co.za, to our highly informative monthly magazine, Real Estate Investor, and our array of engaging webinars, masterclasses, live events and seminars, and a wealth of educational material. So I'm honored to be your host and moderator for today's webinar. I'm also humbled to guide you through this transformative learning experience today. I'm also honored to be your chair and MC for the live residential and investment conference, which will take place on the 12th and 13th of July. So before we dive into today's webinar, first some housekeeping. If you do accidentally log out by some chance, just remember to use the same link as before. You will get back in. Attendees that registered for today's webinar who could not attend today's live version, we will provide you with a recording of today's webinar. So I'd like to remind you to make the most of this interactive experience. So we encourage you to ask questions and use that during the Q&A box chat feature, which is located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And there's also a chat box. Watch out for information, links, and also offers in that chat box. We will reserve some time at the end of the webinar to address many of your questions and queries within the available time that we have. So moving on our topic for today, it's the big debate, exploring housing for all, obstacles, opportunities, and insights. And our goal today as a precursor to the main conference is to delve and uncover the world of housing, investment, and development, specifically in the residential, including affordable social student accommodation and co-living and multi-family developments, which we'll also be covering live at the live conference, which is on the 12th and 13th of July, in much more detail. So our panelists for today are Palesa Ryan. She is the head of Origination and coverage for the social health and education sectors at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And she's responsible for a team which funds projects in affordable housing, education, and healthcare infrastructure. Welcome to you, Palesa.
Good morning, Neil, other participants, as well as the attendees. Thank you for having me on the panel. Pleased to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Great to have you. Paul Jackson, he's the founding CEO of TUHF and began his career in development finance at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And he's as an agricultural economist. He has overseen the financing of over 4 billion of inner city affordable residential property developments and 46,000 affordable rental units. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Neil. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on board as well. Marius Miller, he's the managing director of Soho Properties. Soho is a residential property development company operating under the auspices of Social Housing Regulatory Authority, also known as SHRA, which is in turn an extension of the Ministry of Human Settlements and its implementation agent for the provision of social housing for rental purposes. Welcome to you, Marius.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Session Mudley, he's the regional manager at TUHF, and his career is in finance starting in 2007, also includes residential and commercial property finance, technology finance and asset finance with leading banks, including FNB, Bidvest, and Dell Finance. Welcome, Session, to you.
Thanks, Neil. Good to be here.
Wonderful. Great. Wonderful. So let's start off the big debate, guys. So I'm going to be throwing some questions around. All of you are experiencing this big game, and we're going to be obviously unpacking a lot at the conference on the 12th and 13th of July. But my first question to the panelists and the team of panelists, what is the key obstacles or challenges, in your opinion, in achieving housing for all in South Africa, particularly in the low-income communities? And Palesa, maybe I'm going to give you the first opportunity, maybe just to give us your thoughts around that.
Thank you. I like the narrative of ladies first, Neil. Very chivalrous of you.
Absolutely. Works every time. Women of the Month is coming up next month, so that's very important.
Right? Yes. So what I find is challenging, especially when one looks at the social housing sector and affordable in particular, is that in as much as we've got these great programs that solve for that segment of the population, South Africans are highly indebted. So as much as you qualify from a revenue generative perspective, by the time you've paid off your monthly expenses, the school fees, your debt, especially right now when we see this interest rate rising cycle, people actually don't qualify even for the housing that has been developed for them, like social housing. What's also challenging is because we have such an unequal society, when one looks at the urban areas and maybe to an extent the peri-urban areas versus the more far-flung areas, a lot of people then tend to congregate within our cities where revenue generation happens. But the first home or the first point of entry invariably then becomes your informal settlements, for example. So people migrate out of that into your affordable housing, but there's always this pipeline feeding into that, which compromises the bulk infrastructure, which should be sufficient to support formal infrastructure. So I would say bulk services is a challenge, as well as affordability.
Excellent. I think it's a great way to start, to set the scene very nicely. Marius, what are you seeing as those key obstacles and challenges in achieving housing for all?
So I think there's certain things that are very good and working well. The institutional infrastructure that we have, I think, is a good one. How well it functions may be more of a challenge in terms of capacity. And being a relatively new entrant into the market, we've actually had a very good and professional experience with across the board with the entities that we've dealt with. But the challenge that I've seen is just that there's such a great need and not sufficient resource that's available to be able to attend to everything that's coming through, through that pipeline. So I think there's maybe some level of, where you need to capitalize these entities, particularly the government entities, to allow them to be able to deliver on their mandate, because there's certainly a willingness that I have seen for them to do so. I think one of the challenges that we have, and for me, the banks are a very important custodian of making sure that the system works. So guys like Paul and Session have an immense responsibility, because if the banks are approving deals that aren't going to materialize, or there's going to be executed poorly, or there may be some other challenges around it, that essentially taints the entire sector. And so I think it's important that we make sure that those entities are also capacitated. But the challenge that comes, even if the budget allocation was there, or is the level of skill that's available out there. So we may have a number of projects coming through, but whether someone entering social housing or affordable housing has sufficient experience to actually execute, that's a challenge. And if I may offer a solution, is that there needs to be a more joint effort, coordinated effort, to make sure that we can deliver. Because if I look at social housing in particular, during the Minister Sekhwali's time, that was going to be used as a vehicle to get people to enter into the property market. And although that platform is available, the ability to actually assist them to come along is something that's missing at the moment. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. So Paul, what are you seeing in the inner city? I know you financing, and Maurice mentioned obviously banks financing, which is so important. I mean, you financing the investor a lot, and I mean, not everybody's going to probably be a property owner, but at least they could be a tenant. So, but what are you seeing, certainly from an inner city perspective?
Thanks, Neil. Building on Palesa's comment, I think the biggest obstacle we face is trying to get the understanding, both in the public sector and in the private sector, that investment in housing, and particularly well-located housing, is part of the real economy. It's not a welfare spend, which often is the sort of broad public finance view of housing. It's an investment in local economies. And I think if we're serious about inclusive growth and transformation, we need to understand that it's principally a microeconomic concept. In other words, entrepreneurial activity, whether it's in property or related to property, and associated job creation, happens at street level, at building level, at neighborhood level, at city block type level. So I think the first and the biggest obstacle, I do want to emphasize the point that Palesa made, though, that the fundamentals in place. We have high urbanization, we have increasing energy costs and transport costs, we have the increasing importance of technology, and there's this very strong emphasis. So I think the second issue that we need to understand, and TUHF is in inner city, but we now in city, and we have our Mastandi program, which is a broad township-based program. It's really about urban densification, which is probably the real challenge of our time. South Africa has an urban sprawl crisis, actually. It's not even a problem anymore. The kind of 40 by 40 kilometers away type housing that we tend to continue to develop really negates the importance of urbanization. So we've got great fundamentals in place. We've got a weak economy, and we've got high interest rates, all of which are affecting affordability. And I think that's the point that Palesa was making. And if she wasn't, let me make it. And then the last, and I think the most alarming, is rampant local government taxation. The rate of increases in the taxation in utility supply. You're finding that more and more of the rental rand goes to city. And we can explore the underlying fundamentals of that. So we need an in-city solution. We need it at scale. We need to use densification, and we need to use housing to stimulate local economies, in a nutshell. And I think that we're well poised to do that, provided we can start to understand the real economy effect and related fiscal effects of affordable housing in well-located areas.
Yeah, nicely put, Paul. Session, you obviously look after particularly the KwaZulu-Natal, Bloemfontein areas. What are you seeing as those opportunities and challenges and obstacles in your areas?
Thank you, Neil. I mean, I was just making some notes while everyone was talking, and I think my notes were very much aligned with Paul's comments on a national scale. And I think a lot of the comments were around the end user and the education around, or the education of the final buyer and how they understand how to manage their finances. But I think from an investor point of view, there's also a lack of investor education. It's a small jump to change a person from buying their own home to buying an investment property that's multi-unit, multi-tenanted. So from an investor education point of view, and as we move across our product offering, like Paul mentioned, from our township lending to our inner city lending, we're seeing the difference in the financial education and the investment education. But I think the biggest issue is more specifically with the KZN and Bloemfontein regions. And I think it's the same for any region within South Africa, is the lack of involvement and the inability to meet the demand of the municipalities. And that talks to a lot of stuff, you know, from infrastructure to town planning to rezoning, to just the unwillingness for municipality to move and get the economy moving, is something that we're all struggling in each municipality.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about, we know we've got all these challenges, municipalities, and I think you all elaborated and spelled it out very nicely. But how can we get government, and private sector to collaborate? But I think also government to understand that, it's just not a matter of just hiking rates, and that there has to be some kind of service delivery that's going to match that. But how can we get government and private sector to collaborate to address first of all, the housing shortage, and maybe even from deliverables from a municipal perspective, and maybe let's look at some successful examples. And I know that there are some good examples of such collaboration. Palesa, your thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you, Neil. So I think government, especially on the funding side, is collaborating quite well. So for example, at DBSA, my clients are TUHF. We provide lines of credit to TUHF because they're able to service a part of the housing market a lot more effectively than DBSA can. Paul made the example of Mustandi, for example, which is backyard rentals in township areas. You can't imagine how many people depend on that income to supplement what they otherwise earn or don't earn. But those tend to be micro loans. And from a DBSA perspective, given the types of transactions and the sizes we look at, it just isn't feasible for us to, on a one-by-one basis, deal with those kinds of borrowers. So we then offer lines of credit to Paul and team, similarly with NHFC. But the challenge there is, I find, from a public sector funding solution, our lines of credit, where we ourselves are borrowing, then becomes expensive, right? Because again, we don't have a commercial banking license where we can rely on deposits. It's mostly debt financed. So my cost of funding is not cheap. I pass it on to Paul, and then his cost of funding is not cheap, and he passes it on to the end user. But the truth is, in the low cost, especially social housing market, it's entities like ourselves who've got the biggest risk appetite, who've got the biggest appetite to go in and look at those transactions. From the muni side, I agree with what Paul is saying, and to take it a step further, I in principle wouldn't have an issue with excessive rate hikes if service delivery was being provided. We're looking at a project right now in Secunda, for example, where the municipality can't provide box services for affordable housing. So they've asked, so the developer is going to be taking that cost on. We then asked the question, it's between myself and another commercial bank who are looking at the funding, to say, well, are you going to get a rebate? Because then one would assume that if you're providing the box services, and this is not just for within the township establishment, it's also surrounding, they now have got this infrastructure that belongs to them, but you give the client a rebate so that they can pass that saving on to the ultimate homeowner. And the municipality isn't prepared to do that. So it's just this, how does that make sense? How do you incentivize private sector to come in to do this at a profit, because that's their job, but to also provide housing that is still affordable, housing that is actually still affordable? Because I'm finding that this tension of affordable housing and how much we're actually charging people at the end, most times I don't think it is in fact affordable housing. I hope I addressed the question.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Look, it's a debate. So I think there's, there's various views, and I open up to the panel. If you want to add in, please, I don't have to prompt you at any time. You're welcome to add or comment also on Palesa. And so you're watching, of course, the build up to the big conference, the Residential Development Conference. Marius, I was going to give you the next opportunity. I know collaboration for you is a massive thing. And this whole thing about getting unified funding for the industry. So maybe just share what, how can we get everybody working together on this thing to make it a bit, and I'm sure maybe there's got to be some examples that we can actually say, well, look, this is a great example, one that happened. Maybe how can we implement that and replicate that again?
Thanks for that, Neil. So, if you look at the commercial sector, an organization like SAPOA was established back in the 60s, I think in the late 60s, getting going in the 70s. And out of that, you had sprouted entities like the Green Building Council and the South African Council of Shopping Centres. I think what is sorely lacking and missing in this sector is a unified voice and platform where we could actually engage with government. Because I think there's a lot of good ideas, and I think there's a willingness from both sides to talk to each other. Some of the challenges one faces in getting different organizations together is that you do need a neutral body to actually bring together, whether it's retirement, social housing, student. You've got the likes of Jay Poma with the inner city organization. You need someone to bring that together. Now, whether that is, through a TUHF or an NHFC or through a DBSA, someone who's impartial, but who's aligned with making sure that things happen in that sector, I think that would be crucial, because I think there are really good solutions out there, and there's opportunities to develop the model further. If you look at the successes of the likes of NEDLAC and other business councils, where you've got government and the private sector and employees to a certain extent, or trade unions sitting around the table, I think that would be a step in the right direction. But we need someone who is respected by the industry to take that lead, who's impartial, but has the purest intent, and that is to make sure we get people into homes. And I think there's only one person who qualifies for that, and that's government. And through its various organizations that go below that. But I think the most important bit is we need a unified platform where we can engage each other on.
Yeah, I think it's a very good
Neil,
point.
I would just add that it would be really important at its most basic that we understand roles. There's this wonderful concept of lockout. So as a registered financial institution, TUHF must abide by the law. And if we don't have zoning or plan approval or all these kind of things, they can be the best projects in the world, but we're unable to fund them. And I think back to Palesa's question around infrastructure, we're engaging with municipalities across the board, and particularly in the townships, but also in cities and inner cities. And we're getting really good traction down in Cape Town and a little bit here in Johannesburg to say, guys, all of you, all the metros have a policy on urban densification, without exception, actually. We did a study. This is consistent with provincial legislation and national legislation to say we need to stop from developing new infrastructures and really trying to use existing ones, upgrading them, because the grid's not designed for densification. So I think there needs to be in addition to the point Marius has made, a look at how do we implement policy, because there's policy on the one hand and there's practice on the other, and the practice doesn't move towards policy with the kind of agility that we should expect from government. So you've got really committed people in the two municipalities that we're working. In fact, the mayor of Cape Town came and visited at TUHF, where we were saying, what are the problems we're having in Delft, in Khayelitsha, in Mandalay, and those kind of areas. And they're trying really hard to work how we get around that. The Johannesburg municipality is saying, all right, there's certain areas in Soweto, please focus on these areas. But, you know, Spruit View and others, so there needs to be, I think, a clear role definition. The last point I would like to make is also that we really do need to be more involved in the spending of the local government tax rand, because far too much has been spent on demands from a very powerful union, being SAMWU, and far too much has been spent on huge areas of politically induced non-payment. And so consequently, you have less for service delivery, for infill, for upgrade, for those kind of things. And that equation is getting more and more out of hand. I'm related to a little municipality down the Free State called Kopanong. Their budget, their salaries budget is 112% of the total municipal budget. And so you can see that balance is out of place. So that engagement across the board, I mean, it's the same in Cape Town as it is in Joburg, as it is down in eThekwini, that there's less and less available for service delivery, for infrastructure development, to allow this densification to happen, to allow this investment. There's a pent-up demand for the investment to happen, simply because it's increasingly being used on other things. And it's really something that we are not getting response from local government on across the board, whether it's SAPOA, whether it's JPOMA, whether it's individuals such as the financial institutions, that we've really got to say, guys, if you're collecting 100 Rand from rates and service charges, you know, you've got to protect at least 65 of the 100 Rand for service delivery. It's no use if you're using 80 Rand. You get my drift. So role definition, real insight, and Gux Rands, and this importance of, let's make sure the infrastructure is in place so people can get the rezoning applications, and can get the plan approvals they need to do the investments. So TUHF is sitting on many, many projects that we are unable to finance for these reasons. Many, many.
Well, you mentioned the Western Cape. I attended just 2 weeks ago the Western Cape Property Development Forum, and obviously we had Jordan Hill-Lewis there, and he was actually saying the spend that they've got in the Western Cape, and it's close to 70 billion, of which 1/3 is going into sort of township areas over a 5-year period. It's almost fourfold of what compared to other municipalities. It's unbelievable. And so, you know, and I think they're hell-bent on trying to get the money into services, and definitely not into areas where, you know, like salaries and all these other things is where it should be going. And I mean, it's one small example. I mean, they don't have it 100%, as you said. I mean, you got the challenges. You explained what's going on in Delft and in Khayelitsha. So it's not perfect, but it's a move in the right direction. Palesa, I see you put your hand up. You got a response to that?
Yeah, no, so it's just it's a follow on what you're saying, and what the point that Paul was making as well around the Western Cape. In particularly, I was there for a provincial strat session for the Department of Human Settlements, and I think that commitment that you see from government bears in what's happening to the property prices. Yes, there's an element of it. It certainly isn't equal compared to the rest of the country, because we do have that large foreign ownership, but that's in particular areas. But notwithstanding that, I mean, the residential market there grows at almost double the pace that the rest of the country does. And I think that commitment from an infrastructure perspective drives that to a large extent. Well, what I would be keen on seeing, though, is an unpacking of that study further to see where is that growth coming. You know, you talk about Delft, you talk about your Khayelitsha, and the experience there to your average Western Cape suburb is not the same, of course. But yeah, I think that willingness and that intentionality by the government there, it bears forth even in the development, you know, in property prices.
Marius, so what innovative approaches or strategies can be adopted to make housing more affordable and accessible for South Africans? I mean, maybe, you know, I mean, let's look, and I think Paul unpacked quite a few things as well in terms of regulation and control from the different areas in terms of how it's managed in municipalities. But are there any maybe specific policies or regulations that we possibly need to look, that need to possibly be revised or implemented? I mean, really just to promote more inclusive and sustainable housing.
You know, so I think a big challenge is one that we're facing right now. Now we entered into the social housing space. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, the institutions are there to maintain the integrity of the system. Unfairly so, they're not correctly capacitated. But it comes down to, at the end of the day, a funding issue as well, and what appetite the banks would have to fund into social housing in particular. And that's my area of expertise. So after quite a long process, on Monday, we received a document called the CCG agreement for 356 units to be developed. And we've gone to various institutions to try and find funding. Now, they all have different reasons, but essentially, those in the private sector have said, no, they don't want that appetite. And so I'm not sure how one brings them into the play of this space. But also from a government point of view, there's an imperative to not, you know, throw money away and spend good money on bad in terms of a return, not the project itself. But the experience we've had, I've got 15 letters of funders declining this project that's been approved by government. So that's the only reason we're not able to implement. And that's why I was, you know, advocating for this forum where we can sit down and have the discussion to say, what do we need to do to make things move forward at this very, very last hurdle that we now need to cross. And it's not a matter of, I think it would be inappropriate to expect government just to be dishing out money. You know, there needs to be a commitment from both parties and from either side, whatever that may mean. But until we're actually able to sit across the table from each other, you know, we're not going to advance, because the developer will be saying, well, government, you know, is not really bringing their part, and government will be saying, well, you know, we can't fund inexperienced people, which is correct. So for me, I think there's really an important discussion to be had around how we fund these things, because, you know, it's very challenging to take a purist capitalist approach to something as basic as a human rights need. And so for me, in the social housing space in particular, you know, where there's BNGs or where there's CRUs, other areas in a particular field that has a similar challenge, I think it's really important that we do have a platform to discuss, because these problems have been solved elsewhere. And, you know, we have one of the best banking systems in the world and some of the smartest brains out there. We certainly can get to a solution.
Wonderful. Paul, I mean, you're the financier, so obviously you got to make sure that money is spent responsibly. So, and I'm going to come back again to what's happening in the Western Cape, and I've seen it sort of evolve over a few years. And Marius, you mentioned earlier on about having a unified voice, having somebody dealing with government. At last year's Western Cape Property Development Forum, I've never seen so many mayors in one room, along with the Premier and along with the mayor of Cape Town in one room. And everybody was committed to one sort of goal. Now, if we could take that onto a national level, where we could start getting into responsible investing. So, Paul, I know it's a magic wand, and it's kind of like we're saying, what is it that we need to do to be able to get to that kind of scenario, and also to be responsible, to get, I mean, you're not going to give your money to anybody. If you say, I found this property, if it doesn't make sense from a financial perspective, either to yourself or even to the investor, you're not going to give the loan. Your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's difficult, and each municipality is different. You know, I mean, what's common about all the municipalities, including the ones in the Western Cape, is well above inflation levels of taxation increases. They're all equally problematic, and you don't have to. I mean, I'm an economist by training, but you don't have to go very far to understand the higher the taxation, the less the investment. It's just one of those natural laws. But what do they have that are different? I mean, Joburg has just got straight in political instability, and that doesn't help. Tshwane and eThekwini don't suffer that, and they have other components to it. I think that when we come to SRA and SRA finance, TUHF's always taken the view that we would finance SRA stuff, but provided we can resolve a few issues. And we've asked this question of SRA for the first time in 2006. We still don't have the answer. You know, if you've got the first mortgage bond, can you foreclose without and perfect your security without any interference from government? The rental setting processes, can those be more clearly understood? Ditto the reporting. And then how do we bring SRA grants to smaller developers in city areas? So I think that the appetite for financing, certainly at TUHF, and believe me, we've got competitors, is quite high. We have a deal flow that is constrained by the kind of things that we're talking about. And I think that Marius's idea of a forum would be a good idea, but I think it won't surpass, you know, the individual sit down and try and work what are some of the issues out. But where you have supportive local government, it really does help. But the processes are long, you know. We've been dealing with City of Cape Town for 2 years to try and get around these zoning and plan approval issues. And there's a lot of activity, but to date, the results have been, well, you know, it's getting closer. At least there's some hope, but it hasn't happened. So, you know, and it really does lock the financiers out who then lock out the developers. And there are lots and lots of small developers doing 20 units, 60 units, whatever, those kind of things. So I don't think you should underestimate the appetite of the financial services sector to play their part. I think it's not a reluctance. I think it's just the institutional inertia of trying to bring the various parts together. And I think Marius is correct to express a concern about that inertia and that lack of, you know, there's very little synergy. But that's why back to basics, making sure that we can get practice to reflect policy, which there seems to be a disjuncture now. I'm not sure I answered the question, but it's don't underestimate the willingness of the private sector to come to the party, particularly the financial services sector. Also backed by the DBSAs of this world, and Palesa is right. Without DBSA support, TUHF would have been have been less able to meet the demand. I will make the another observation though, Neil, is that now is a good time to invest. You know, there's a lot of repricing going on, and it's a general statement. It's different in in Cape Town than it is in Joburg, for example. So you have to be very quite area specific. But speaking about Joburg, you know, it's a good time to invest because increased interest rates increase demand for rental housing. And there's, you know, the prices of property are coming off in Joburg, you know, across the board, I think. So there are deals to be done if you're prepared to do the hard work to go and find them.
Session, I see you wanted to weigh in over there. I know you've been, we've left you out, but you must join in. Palesa, we'll get to you. I see your hand is up as well. So
Yeah.
Session, you probably hopefully seen some really good stuff happen out in KZN and Bloem as well. Maybe some good examples, but yeah.
Yeah, Neil, just to comment on Marius and Paul's recent comments. I think it's important to also understand that the financial institutes are now adverse to doing those type of investments because of the history of it and because of the risk base. And as Paul rightly mentioned, we should rather have a conversation of what are the hurdles and try to overcome those hurdles from a risk-based approach. Because that's all the Finance Institute, I think, issue would be is what's the risks attached to it and how do we overcome the risks? And at the end of the day, whilst we can't expect government to be paying out all the money, and there is a requirement from public and private partnerships, we have to try to mitigate risk to the business from an investment point of view. The other portion is that it's seen from an investor point of view, and certainly it's been my experience, is that if I need to get a little to give a little. So how is my municipality giving me back the value for my money for me to start investing in my municipality? And then the final point that I wanted to comment was that social housing works in a lot of other countries and works very well. But we also have to understand the difference of the tax-based population in those countries. I think in South Africa, we're running at like 10% at the moment of a tax-paying base. And that's a very big defining factor when we talk about the money available to spend. And we should be cognizant of that, but having a conversation is the right thing to do and putting us around a table, but we should talk about how we find ways to mitigate risk rather than finding ways to fund. The money is available, as we said.
Excellent. Nicely put there, Session. And you're on the big debate, exploring housing for all, obstacles, opportunities, and insight. Palesa, you got your hand up. I know you wanted to weigh in there.
No, I think Session ended what I wanted to say, which is, I often say to clients, it isn't a challenge of money. The money is definitely there. I mean, if I think of my sector, we've got a 60 billion rand prudential limit. I haven't even scratched the surface. So it's not a money issue. It's a quality project issue. And going back to what Paul was saying, but first as a step back, we started getting involved in social housing directly, where DBSA lends to SHIs as well as other delivery agents only about 2 years ago. And that's because we appreciated that, notwithstanding that you've got other entities like your TUHF and NHFC, Nedbank is also quite active in this market. The gap is so huge, the challenge so big. I think that there's enough room for everybody to play and still do some. And that's why we got involved directly in social housing ourselves now. But what makes it challenging from a funding perspective is there isn't clarity in legislation in terms of how one exits the asset. So if you wanted to call on your collateral, how do you do that? Because there's this mismatch where the owner is government, the borrower is private sector. So you default, Neil, but it's not your asset, you know, and from a banking perspective, that's a challenge for us. So that was the one. But I mean, there have been a lot of good developments this year that have made the sector attractive. For example, the increase in the CCG, where we've seen what's been happening with the price of construction over the last 2-3 years. COVID hasn't helped, the war in Ukraine hasn't helped. So that kind of increase has been quite important. But again, because of COVID, a lot of our clients had to stop construction. And it's a pity that this increased CCG can't be applied retrospectively. So you've got a lot of deals where we started talking, say, 2 years ago, that now are no longer bankable because the cost has just moved that far off. But yeah, we're definitely in the market for it. And Marius, I know that one of the ladies in my team knows your business. So very happy for us, if you aren't already engaging on a formal basis, to take a look at your pipeline of projects and see what can be done. And we try to be proactive. I haven't met with Sershan, but I do speak to some of the other colleagues at REI Sershan on a monthly basis to say, what's the pipeline of approvals that have come in this quarter? What are you seeing going forward, so that DBSA can come on board and support? Because quite right, like Paul said, if it doesn't have a CCG or SHRA approval, it's not social housing. So if it's not social housing, if it's affordable, we'd look at it, but it's a completely different risk profile. And this is the critical role that I think government plays and plays well, you know, in terms of unlocking housing projects in this space. Thanks.
Excellent. So Marius, and I know you stuck your hand up here, but I also want to put in the question there, you know, are there any international best practices or lessons that we can learn from other countries that can be applied to South Africa in the context in terms of achieving housing for all? And maybe you want to comment just on what Palesa said as well.
Yeah. So maybe just to comment on the first bit. Palesa, thanks for the invitation, but we've actually had a really good experience with your colleagues, and they've been very helpful in moving forward. The point that I really want to make is that even finding a solution for my problem doesn't solve the national issue and the sectoral issue. And that's why I think it's important that we're on a platform that may solve my problem or not, but it does make it easier for the next guy to do their things as well. Now, I know all the banks, what you've expressed and what Paul has expressed, each and every other bank has expressed the same thing. But I think individually to SHRA, and maybe there needs to be a forum where there's a collective discussion, and maybe through to the Department of Human Settlements, you know, getting a better ear as to what the issues are and why people aren't coming in, why the big developers are shying away from the sector when they can actually make the most impact. And Neil, as far as the you know, internationally, we've deviated slightly from what happens elsewhere. Elsewhere, particularly in Europe, North America, there seems to be a subsidy of the rental that gets paid, whereas in South Africa, it's you know, we get a capital contribution upfront, and I think that is really a good way to go. And there's obviously risks attached to that, but I think it would be very difficult. Imagine for, you know, 60,000 social housing units out there to be putting in invoices on behalf of those tenants that you have on a monthly basis, trying to get that from the from government and then pay it over to the likes of, you know, TUHF and DBSA. So the financial modeling does differ from place to place, but I think the issue that is significantly different is that there's capacity, and you know, we must make sure that we never impact negatively on the institutional integrity of, you know, the institutions administering these programs, because when you do that, it means that even when you come with a good project at a future point in time, you know, it's going to be tarnished with what's happened in the past. So I think continue doing what we're doing, but seek how to improve it, because I think what we're doing is world class. The structure is world class. We just need to move it up a level.
Excellent. Great. So what I'm going to do now, and Palesa, I'm going to come back to you now. I just want to bring in Debbie. I'm going to give everybody the opportunity to give your 2-minute wrap, because you cannot believe it, the time has moved on. We've got 10 minutes to go, but the whole idea is everybody that's already on now is please come along to the Residential Investment and Development Conference. It's going to be in Sandton. It's in Johannesburg this year. Hopefully, Debbie, it'll be next year. Debbie, if you want to put on your cam and maybe tell us a little bit what's happening. I know you got a special offer and that kind of thing, but I think so far it's been an absolutely insightful, fantastic debate. I think we've got an awesome team around us. So Debbie, maybe just tell us what's happening on the 12th and 13th of July.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank the panelists and Neil for a really insightful panel. I actually have goosebumps because I'm hearing the debate and I'm thinking in 2 weeks' time, we have panels of almost 8 people representing all the partners that we're talking about. So, you know, when Mario says we need that collaboration, that was really the whole intent behind the Residential Investment and Development Conference. We could see that there's a very disjointed industry. I think everyone with great intentions. I think something we've been blown away by is just all these bodies that are supportive. And that's what we were hoping to achieve. Just this is the first one. If I have to tell you, I'm telling people it's like a snowball that is just rolled, and I'm using all my different analogies, but everything's exploded. We actually didn't have enough hours in the day to handle everyone coming to attend, but we did promise something. So before I get, I'm going to talk a little bit about the event, I do want to see who was listening. So for those in the audience that are still there, quickly, the first person to tell me when the event is, the dates, or no, we're cheating here. No, I'm going to say where. You can tell me where it's going to be because someone's very efficient there and put the dates. You will get a free ticket to attend valued at, well done, Ruth. You're awesome, Sandton. Oh, sorry. Okay, Ruth, well done. Yes, so you get a free ticket. If you can just pop your email in the chat, I'll make sure that you get it, valued at 10,000 Rand. I cannot believe it. We're actually up to almost 14 affiliate bodies and partners. Minister 1, which is the Minister of Human Settlements, Honorable Kubayi is confirmed. I can't say yet, but we'll know in about an hour. We might even have another minister. So please come and join us. We've also, the committee has agreed that if you are coming through any bodies or partners, we are facilitating the 50% fee, because what's important this year is that everyone that needs to be there is there. I've never actually seen a program with 50 speakers in 2 days. I think we're going to have a challenge trying to keep the conversation in the time. So there's definitely not going to be a lack of the right people there engaging and collaborating and debating. So hop onto the website, look at that program. And I have a feeling if you are going to come and attend, really make sure you take the 2 full days. And it'll be the first time ever that whether you are fully into affordable and social housing, that you'll be exposed to the other areas and vice versa. So again, just want to thank Neil for your partnership. I don't know if he's going to show the slide, but also very exciting. And this is out of a passion coming from our committee, and Neil is chair on that, is the awards. So we're doing a soft launch of the awards at the event. The finalists have been determined by a peer review panel for this year. Next year, you'll have to enter. So if you do join us as well, we'll be giving out those awards at the cocktail function straight after on day 1. And yeah, looking forward to, I'm going to see all these panelists. As great as this debate was today, you get to go even deeper with us in 2 weeks' time. So please be part of making history, because as far as I understand, we've never seen something like this, and we're really, really excited.
Awesome. I think,
and Ruth, I will see you there. Come and shake my hand.
And listen, for the rest of you, don't forget there's a 50% special offer. There's a link in the chat box below. It's 50% off, so half price special offer on the tickets for the conference. So we're not saying don't arrive. We're also offering you, we bear gifts with you as well. So half price, you just click on the link below and you can go there. And I'm really excited about the awards, the Residential Developer of the Year, the Social Housing Developer of the Year, Affordable Housing Developer of the Year, Retirement Village Developer of the Year, and Student Accommodation Developer of the Year. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go around to the team. I'm going to start off with you, Palesa, with your final thoughts, your parting shots. Thank you, Debbie. It's wonderful. We look forward to the event. I'm really excited. And I think you really have done a fantastic job in putting together 50 speakers. Well done to you. I'm just going to ask the wrap up there, starting with you, Palesa. Give us your 2 minutes, your minute and a half. I'll see the time is running out very quickly. But if you could just give us your final wrap, leave something with something exciting that they can walk away with.
Okay, so we spent a lot of the debate talking about social housing, and when you asked Marius the question around what sort of innovative financing or products has he seen outside of South Africa, And you responded quite rightly that we are actually leading in terms of the market. I do quite a bit of work also extensively across the continent because DBSA does have a sub-Saharan African footprint. And I can honestly say that the investment that the government makes into housing is the best that I have seen. Whether it's breaking new ground, the serviced land parcels, the CCG, with social housing. And if one takes it to student housing, it isn't that upfront capital injection. But if one looks at that NASPIS allocation that gets factored into the models by the developers as a month-on-month instrument, that's also something that one typically doesn't see. So we have the tools. I think we have the willingness. It's just bringing it all together and delivering on what's really critically required at the moment. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Palesa. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. Palesa Ryan of DBSA, thank you very much. Session, your parting shots, and then we'll get to Paul and then to Marius.
Thanks, Neil. I think we've all spoken about obstacles and insights, but just touching on opportunities, I think currently rates are high. Everybody's worried about where the market's going and uncertain about elections next year and stuff like that. When the rates are up, the rental market is booming, and vice versa. We're seeing some great opportunities that are coming onto the market at the moment. Commercial properties are really doing well as an investment opportunity. Guys are selling at far, far below what you can actually build these properties for. So look at the opportunities in the areas, chat to your financiers, chat to guys at TUHF or DBSA, and look at some of those opportunities. I think it's the right time to buy. It's never the wrong time to buy, just buy right.
Session, I think that's a wonderful way to finish. I mean, as an investor on the ground, I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, you cannot, for the construction of those properties, you cannot pay for, it's unbelievable. The deals are out there. Thank you, Session Moodley of TUHF. Thank you very much. Paul, your parting shots, please.
Just to reiterate, the future is urban, and the future is urban densification rather than sort of sprawl. And that means there needs to be lots and lots of smaller projects, which gives a huge opportunity to the small and medium developers, because it's unlikely you're going to be able to do very big projects in town. Keep your municipality honest in their roles and their service. It's hard, but we need to continue on that. And remember that, an investment in housing is an investment in part of the real economy, stimulates economic growth if it's done in the right areas. So keep and then just to reiterate Sershan's point, buying right and buying now in town is a good idea.
Excellent. Nice way to finish there, Paul Jackson, CEO of TUHF. Marius, you got the last say, and I know you're also a key part of this whole conference as well. So maybe you want to, so that you got the, he that speaks last is, you got the stage.
Look, I must say, I think my wife would disagree with you about having the last word here. but be that as it may, I think, again, just to acknowledge the work that's being done to these various institutions, whether it's, SHNART, DBSA, TUHF, whoever it may be. But we've identified lots of issues that we need to address. And having thought about it, I would make myself available to work alongside whoever it may be to establish a platform where we can engage properly. And it may take long, it will take long, but the problem's not going to go away. And the sooner we start working collectively towards a solution, I think the better. And I'm sure there are others who will commit their time free of charge as well. Thanks,
Wonderful.
Neil.
Great, thank you. Wonderful way to finish. Marius Miller, CEO of Properties, and of course the continuation of this discussion happens in Sandton on the 12th and 13th of July, Residential Investment and Development Conference. Be there, sign up now. 50 people, influential people in the residential space, from affordable housing, social housing, property development, student accommodation. You've got to be there. So once again, our heartfelt appreciation to our panelists, Palesa Ryan, to Paul Jackson, Sergeant Moodley, and Marius Miller for generously sharing their time and also their expertise on investing with us today. And as we conclude the session, I want to remind you not to miss the upcoming edition of Real Estate Investor Mag. It's in www.rei.co.za. And we've also got, before the big conference, which is on the 12th and 13th, don't miss our webinar next Thursday, also at 12 o'clock. And we look at discovering the incredible returns of UK HMO investments. To secure a spot, you just click on the link below or go to the website and register there. In the meantime, once again, thank you to our team. We will meet again in the next couple of weeks at the Residential Investment and Development Conference and Awards. And thank you to the panel. And this is Neil Peterson of Real Estate Investor signing off. Goodbye, everybody.